For those who are here for the session on local perspectives to make gender-just climate finance a reality, please take your seats, and we will start soon. All right. So welcome to this session on local perspectives about gender-just climate finance. I am Femi Pinto, Director at the Non-Timber Forest Products Exchange Program, NTFP EP Asia, an association of indigenous and community-based and non-government organizations aligned with a vision of resilient indigenous peoples and local communities, with women and youth in Asia who are respected and empowered as stewards of healthy forests and who are living securely in their land for present and future generations. This session is organized by GAGGA, the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action, of which NTFP Exchange Program, both ends, and Fondo Centroamérica de Mujeres, or FCAM, organizers of this session, are all a part. GAGGA's network consists of women's funds, environmental justice funds, NGOs, and grassroots organizations in 39 countries. GAGGA works on capacity strengthening, lobby and advocacy, and building and strengthening alliances of grassroots women's organizations across Asia, Latin America, and Africa. We are very pleased to have the opportunity to address this crucial topic of gender-just climate finance, and that we are joined by a great set of local and indigenous women speaking and a representative of a feminist collective for indigenous women's rights in Asia. Also grateful for the participation of a distinguished panel representing key stakeholders on climate finance. And very pleased to have you all here, which also reflects an amount of interest, a great amount of interest, and I imagine a wealth of experience that you can also share on this topic in this room today. We also have people who have registered online. So welcome to everyone. Translation is also available in French and Spanish, and the devices can be picked up near the entrance. As I said, there's also some people who registered online, so this event is live streamed. Before I introduce the speakers and the panel, I would like to note that this session will address some, but not all, recommendations of the GAGGA call to action. Of the GAGGA call to action, a collaborative set of demands and recommendations for gender-just climate finance prepared for this COP by the GAGGA Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action. Please see the call to action on the screen, and we provide an easy accessible code to open the link to the call. Across the world, women's rights groups and civil society at large are calling for climate finance to be accessible, inclusive, and gender-just. Estimates from 2017 of climate finance show that only less than 10% of climate finance between 2003 and 2016 was directed to the local level. Within the Green Climate Fund, 79% of financing is currently distributed via international institutions and 21% via direct access entities. Of the more than 200 projects, only 13% are implemented by national DAEs and 11% by regional ones. And 2/5 of GCF funding is consolidated into 5 international actors, including the UNDP, the World Bank, EBRD, and the IDB, that tend to focus on large-scale projects. In terms of bilateral ODA, in 2014, for example, 31% was earmarked for climate, and of which only 3% had gender equality as a principal objective, and 28% integrated gender equality as a secondary objective. We would be interested to hear of progress made since then and plans that we can look forward to towards more gender-just climate finance. When we say gender-just climate finance, we mean that women in all their diversity have access to climate finance, especially those from marginalized groups, indigenous, rural, youth, that are most impacted by climate change and are leading climate action. They have decision-making power in the allocation of climate finance. Climate finance projects actively challenge and address gender inequalities while promoting and protecting human rights and achieving climate impact. In our call to action, we have multiple concrete recommendations on how to achieve this towards climate funds, particularly the GCF and the Adaptation Fund and member states. At the end of the session, we will show the call to action again, accompanied by a link to other relevant documents available to the public. So now, let me introduce our panel of speakers. On the far right, Ms. Camdo is the Director General at Global Affairs Canada, Innovative and Climate Finance Bureau. She was the Executive Director for the Climate Finance Team, leading and delivering on Canada's $5.3 billion climate finance. She has broad experience working at both the bilateral and multilateral levels in the areas of climate finance, economic governance, health, and private sector. The next panelist, Ms. Young-hee Lee, a Korean national, governance specialist, and gender coordinator at the Adaptation Fund. She had led the gender work of the fund since 2016. As a lawyer by training, she also provides legal and policy advice on the matters related to the fund. Mr. Pa Usman Jarju, another panelist at the far end, currently is the secretary to the board and head of the Office of Governance Affairs of the Green Climate Fund. Formerly, he was Minister of Environment, Minister of Environment, Climate Change, Water Resources, Parks and Wildlife, and UNFCCC's focal point of the Gambia. And our last panelist is Joanne Carling, who is the Global Director at the Indigenous Peoples' Rights International, an organization that works to end criminalization of people defending Indigenous rights. She has served as Secretary General of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact and has chaired the Cordillera Peoples Alliance in the Philippines and has also contributed to the UNFCCC and climate change and UNFCCC and Red Plus activities and has served as a member of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. And we have two presenters who are part of the GAGGA. Maria Matui is Executive Director of Women Action Towards Economic Development, or WATED, the chairperson for the Coalition for Gender and Change, and a board member of the Coalition Women's Rights Defenders, and which is also hosting the Coalition for Gender and Climate Change in Tanzania. She's a GAGGA partner and active in the Women and Gender constituency. A last speaker is Cheryl Polutan, who is program coordinator at the feminist collective called Lilac Purple Action for Indigenous Women's Rights from the Philippines. And here now also representing Women in Action and Mining in Asia, an alliance of grassroots women's organizations and women and environmental justice funds from different countries in Asia and a partner of GAGGA. Our panelists will share their insights and reactions to our speakers' presentations about GJCF. But first, let me invite to the podium to put in context our topic for this afternoon. Adolfina Kuum, she is a courageous Indigenous Amongme woman leader and environmental and human rights defenders and leads a grassroots organization in West Papua, Lepemawi, Timika, Papua. Dolly will be speaking in Bahasa, Indonesia, and she will be supported by Ms. Sarah Agustiorini with translation to English. Sarah herself is a feminist campaigner from TKPT, or Tim Kerja Perempuan dan Tambang, a grassroots women's organization in East Kalimantan, formed also as a consequence of the many struggles of indigenous and local women around extractives in the region. So let's start the session and listen to Dolly and Sarah now.
No, just stay there. It's okay. Terima kasih, Femi. Saya langsung saja mulai. Saya berdomisili di Timika, Papua, tepatnya di lahan emas Amerika dan orang Jakarta.
Hi everyone, thank you Femi for the time and for the floor. I will talk. I'm Dolly. I'm from where the largest mining in the world, the gold mining in the world, affiliation with the US and also in Indonesia. I'm stay there right now, Papua.
Freeport, mitigasi dan climate fund. Meski menjadi tuan, slide berikutnya, slide. Yes. Ya, oke, terima kasih. Yang tanda saya berasal dari sana, ada peta, di sana ada Grassroots, Tembagapura, tempat saya tinggal di sana. Meski Indonesia dibilang mempunyai hutan terluas sebanyak 32 juta hektar, namun perubahan iklim yang hari ini terjadi di Papua seperti cuaca tidak menentu, banjir, kekeringan meningkat, namun tidak semua bencana lingkungan di sekitar daerah kami itu terjadi karena perubahan iklim, tetapi persoalan penyebab terbesar adalah keberadaan PT Freeport Makmuran dulu dan sekarang diambil alih sahamnya oleh Indonesia Inalum sejak 1967, 54 tahun yang lalu.
You can see the red point that I will come from. I'm stay in the largest of the forest in Indonesia, also in the world, 32 million hectare, and the rising on climate change right now, flooded, weather I can expect, and then the strong winter, strong wind, but however, not all the disaster of the environment are caused by the climate change, as you know right now. In my place, the main disaster in Papua was because of the world's largest mining, PT Freeport, by the USA. And we'll continue, Kakak.
Keberadaan Freeport menghancurkan gunung yang dianggap keramat suci oleh suku Amungme di wilayah pegunungan. Dan untuk pesisir, Freeport membuang limbah tailing 3.000 ton setiap harinya dan menghancurkan sendi-sendi kehidupan di masyarakat 23 kampung dan 3 kecamatan.
From the high mountain, Freeport just destroying a holy mountain belong with our customary. And the coastal, Freeport just degrades and polluted the river and the mangrove area.
Telah terjadi krisis air bersih, kematian sungai seperti terlihat di gambar, kekeringan pohon yang terjadi di Sungai Ajikwa Wanogong, dan juga kematian ikan massal yang sudah terjadi 3 kali.
You can see in the picture, first is the death of the river where my community living, and the second one is the death of the coastal area where the fisher and the other community where have living, and the second one we already had fish killed 2 times in the fourth year.
Terjadi di tahun 2016, di tahun 2020 dan juga Februari 2020 dan Maret 2020 ketika kami menanyakan akibat Freeport selalu mengatakan bahwa kematian ikan massal adalah akibat dari fenomena alam tanpa dia melihat pembuangan limbah beracun yang hari ini terjadi kerusakan parah di Timika.
There is 2 times in 2020 and 1 time in 2016 the fish was killing. We asked the PT Freeport why the fish just died. They just say it's not just because the waste tiling waste, it's because karena apa dia mati, Kak?
Pembuangan limbah.
It's because the climate has changes.
Pendangkalan juga terjadi. Masyarakat yang hendak ke kampung akibat pembuangan limbah tailing, susahnya akses transportasi ke desa menjadi sangat mahal, berbahaya. BBM yang sangat mahal, khususnya bagi anak-anak dan perempuan dan orang tua.
In other hand, not only in the river, in the coastal area, the PT Freeport just circulation by the waste of the tiling. Some accident by the coastal was happening right now.
Itu adalah kasus yang terjadi di tahun 2018 di mana anak-anak sekolah tidak mengikuti ujian nasional. Berikut masyarakat mengalami kerusakan pada perahu tempel longbox mereka, dan berikutnya adalah masyarakat yang korban dalam kecelakaan laut karena perahu mereka menabrak tumpukan limbah di laut.
If you can see in the front is one of the picture is the accident. The children can have an exam in the last year, in the end of the year, because the boat just stuck in the coastal because of the wasting of the tiling. And the second one is the accident for the transportation, where the local food is going to the city for the market and distribute to all the community. Next.
Pembuangan limbah juga mengakibatkan laut jadi dangkal dan telah terjadi angin kencang gelombang yang meninggi di Kampung Amar pada 22 Januari yang menghancurkan rumah penduduk.
Not only that, not only accident, but the waste of the tiling also make a wiser of the coastal. Sometimes the strong wind just coming and strong the wiser is also coming to the village. Amar is sometimes that doing that one.
3 unit rumah rusak parah, 20 masyarakat adat mengungsi di balai kampung, diantaranya 11 orang adalah anak kecil.
30 house just damaged and destroyed just because of the wise, and the community become refugee and that evacuated from the village to the another area.
Telah terjadi pengungsian tahun 2017 di Kampung Pasir Hitam akibat kampung mereka dikepung limbah dan masyarakat harus meninggalkan tanah leluhur moyang mereka dan mengungsi ke kota.
In 2017, the wasted of the go surround the area of the village and the community become refugee. The government just evacuated the people from the village to the another village, from the higher mountain to the coastal area.
Tahun 2021 pengungsian masyarakat adat di Tembagapura dekat daerah tambang dan sebanyak 2.114 penduduk, 25 orang meninggal, 18 perempuan dan 7 laki-laki.
25 person was died, and then more berapa perempuan?
18.
18 of them is a woman and another one is child. Kakak yang itu.
Komunitas kami, berikut hadirnya komunitas kami di Timika selama 10 tahun kami memperjuangkan persoalan masyarakat adat ke Freeport dan pemerintah dengan negosiasi dan mediasi. Tetapi Freeport dan pemerintah akan memanfaatkan semua tuntutan dan permohonan kita untuk dijadikan proyek mereka.
We organize the community for the demand of the Freeport. How can make a problem was resolved, but the Freeport just say your problem that's well resolved, and we try the best for that. And the problem from the community, from the Lapemawi, is just one of the damage by the Freeport, like ask something the program to how they can manage their money.
Fokus kerja kami adalah advokasi non litigasi. Kami tidak pernah ke jalur hukum dan kami melakukan sosialisasi, pendokumentasian, riset dan juga pendidikan terhadap perempuan seperti yang terlihat di gambar. Itu adalah salah satu fokus kerja kami, komunitas kami hari ini.
Since 10 years ago, we focus on our community, women first. We do socialis about the impact of the childing. We do the litigate and mitigate the process. We do research. And we do educate the women and child about the environment.
Tantangan kami adalah tantangan internal dan eksternal. Internal kami berjuang sendiri tanpa didukung oleh siapapun. 2014 sekretariat kami dihancurkan. Mereka mencuri semua dokumen oleh teman kami sendiri dan kami yakin itu suruhan dari Freeport.
We have challenges and in our community. First by our self, that in our organization, we just do everything by ourselves. We don't have a donator or something to help us. We have our fund to do everything.
Sekretariat dihancurkan.
And we also have a problem when 2014 that I never forget about that. Some of our community he had a traitor, and they destroy our secretariat, and then after that he just join with the PT Freeport. That's one our problem.
Stigma masyarakat dan negara, stigma masyarakat, budaya patriarki, perempuan di stigma nomor 2, makhluk lemah, perempuan tidak mempunyai kebebasan berorganisasi, berpolitik, bicara di depan umum, berpartisipasi dalam urusan publik.
Not only on internal situation have the challenges, but in external we also do that. Okay. For stigma from the nation and our community that women can do anything about that. Firstly, about that we fight for the company, fight for the government, for our land, for our children and our community as a women.
Mayoritas laki-laki menganggap bahwa urusan mencuci, memasak adalah tugas perempuan.
Women just need to washing their clothes, washing their spoon and the plate, just for the women. Do household, not for the fight, and go frontier for the demonstration.
Tantangan eksternal adalah stigma negara terhadap aktivis HAM dan pembela lingkungan dengan separatis kelompok kiri anti pembangunan dan mereka semakin meneror kami dengan ancaman-ancaman intimidasi pembungkaman ruang demokrasi.
First is for the human right defender and environmental defender. They are on the front of the stigma from the community and also from the nation. Women just part of the who will fight and disrupt our business and something.
Pemerintah, perusahaan, lembaga adat, elit politik di Timika menganggap keberadaan kami telah mengganggu bisnis mereka.
Freeport and the government just mentioned that our now just disrupt their business.
Pandangan Freeport bahwa 23 kampung dan 3 kecamatan tidak termasuk dalam kompensasi wilayah Freeport.
Right now, 23 of the village is not part of the compensation of the PT Freeport. They have 1% for the community in our regulation, but not for 23 village and 3 district.
Dan apa tanggapan Freeport terkait dengan semua persoalan tadi? Freeport akan mengatakan bahwa perusahaan akan merespon dengan kejahatan perusahaan alam dibungkus dengan iklim hijau dengan klaim bahwa Freeport sudah memitigasi perubahan iklim, kemungkinan sudah diperhitungkan sebagai bagian dari pengukuran dana untuk iklim.
And how the PT Freeport respond about the demonstration and the protest from the community? First, Freeport just mentioned about how we will revitalize and we will mitigate that your place with our program for greening your village, but not happen in the 23 village. The crime for the Freeport just destroying nature by the war of the climate green right now.
Maka terakhir izinkan saya untuk menyampaikan rekomendasi saya kepada NGO masyarakat adat, jaringan perempuan pembela HAM lingkungan internasional yang hari ini hadir di sini dan juga NGO yang mendukung kami kegiatan hari ini bahwa
Suruh baca aja. And now I wanna call you. I need your support from the NGO international working on the environment, human rights defender, activist defender, and the women for support us.
Menjalin solidaritas dengan jaringan perempuan pribumi, perempuan pembela hak asasi manusia, lingkungan, regional dan global. 2. Dukung perempuan adat Amungme Sempan Kamoro di Papua untuk pengembangan kapasitas jejaring pembelajaran kampanye bersama persoalan yang masyarakat hadapi. 3. Pemberdayaan kepada masyarakat karena kami memastikan bahwa pengetahuan dan aspirasi kami akan diteruskan oleh generasi ke generasi yang akan datang. Terakhir, harapan kami apabila Freeport tidak bertanggung jawab terhadap semua persoalan yang terjadi hari ini di tanah kami, kampung kami, sebaiknya Freeport segera meninggalkan tanah adat kami, karena kami tidak hidup dengan hasil tambang, kami tidak hidup dengan biarkan kami hidup dengan cara tradisional kami sendiri. Terakhir bahwa karena perempuan adalah yang memberi kehidupan, maka kami tetap akan berjuang terus karena perempuan yang melahirkan insan yang bernama manusia di muka bumi. Maka hargailah seorang perempuan yang hari ini berjuang di garis depan. Terima kasih.
That is our call, call for support. And the last that before finish, I just wanna mention, we hope the PT report just end and living from our community and stop to destroying and disrupt us and our land. Also, make a difficult woman life right now because the woman is one of the birth the everyone in the world. And I'm also show you that if you more information about the situation and place, please you can scan our position paper, Timikala Pemawi, and also the fact sheet for the another issue, the big one, another like different with the PT report. We are thank you for you all and thank you Femi.
Thank you, Dolly, for, I know that it has taken her courage to go through and recount the experiences that they've had over the last so many years, and even preparing for her presentation. So thank you very much, Dolly. And hopefully we can kick off a good discussion after her story. So I open, and thank you, Sarah, for helping Dolly out with the translation. So now I open the first question to our 4 panelists. I know it was like a kind of a dark, sort of dark start, but hopefully there's some hope that we can find in this hour and a half discussion. So the first question is basically, as our event is about gender-just climate finance, what does it mean to you? So I addressed the questions to Mr. Pa, to Yung, to Cam, and Joanne. What does it mean to you, and how does your organization or country attempt to make this a reality? And in Dolly's story, what struck you the most? So maybe, I don't know, maybe I can start with you.
You started with me?
Okay, Mr. Pa, you can start.
Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And the call for action to provide concrete recommendations to policymakers and government officers is indeed an important way of enhancing and ensuring gender justice, climate finance. The GCF is the first finance mechanism to mainstream gender perspectives from the onset of its operation. And this has been a very essential decision-making element for the deployment of its resources. We focus at bridging the gap in climate financing, and I'm pleased to indicate that progress has been made since the adoption of the updated gender policy and gender action plan for 2020-2023. The updated gender policy also acknowledges that climate change initiatives are more sustainable, equitable, and more likely to achieve their objectives when gender equality and women's empowerment considerations are integrated in the design, development, and implementation of our projects. Now, gender mainstreaming is therefore is very central to the objectives and the guiding principles through which we engage women and men of all ages during the design, development, and implementation of our strategies and activities. Furthermore, we have been named as commitment maker in the Coalition Action on Feminist Action for Climate Justice. And we have committed to providing our funds and mobilizing co-financing that is designed to optimize the core benefits of climate action between gender equality. So I think what we have had here is very striking, and we are going to ensure that the projects that we implement are aligned with our gender policy and also our gender action plan to empower women, and their voices are heard at all levels of the development strata. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pa. I'll move on to Cam. And maybe you have 3 minutes if you can.
Sure, I'll try to be very short. But thank you so much for inviting me to this event. And I'm really happy to be here and to hear your inspiring story, Delfina. And it's really communities like yours that are, showing how we should be working towards a gender-just climate solutions. And it shows the resilience and the spirit of your community. There's no question, right? We are facing multiple crises today. We're looking at the immediate term. There's the economic crisis. There's the health crisis as a result of COVID-19, the food insecurity, rising costs living everywhere. And then, of course, the longer-term crisis of climate change, as we just heard from Delfina, and how it's really impacting her community and the livelihoods of her community. And as she noted, really, that it's the vulnerable population, right, especially the women in all their diversity, as well as Indigenous populations who bear the brunt of this crisis. And so to answer your question, how does Canada make gender-just climate finance a reality? Well, this starts at the very highest level, right? So for us, it starts with our feminist international assistance policy, which is applicable across the Government of Canada. And this policy places gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls at the heart of all of our programming and policy. So what we're trying to do is really to leverage the expertise and the knowledge of women's rights organizations, Indigenous peoples, local grassroots organizations, etc., really just to push forward the localization agenda in these countries. So at its core, what we want to do is to amplify these voices and promote opportunities for increased leadership and decision making. Because if they're not at the table, they won't be able to help design where the projects are going. And in the climate space, we want to support employment and business opportunities for women in non-traditional sectors, right? Such as the renewable energy, where in most places women aren't, there isn't a majority of women in those sectors. So our goal really is to ensure that the most vulnerable have more equitable access to and control over the resources they need to secure economic and social equality. So more concretely, what does this look like? So since the launch of our policy, my department, Global Affairs Canada, we've launched several initiatives to support women's rights organizations globally. The first one is the Women's Voice and Leadership. This is a $150 million initiative that was launched back in 2017, and it's supporting over 400 women's rights and LGBTQI plus organizations in the Global South. And then a second initiative is the $5.3 billion that I manage, and that is really looking, that was announced last year, and it's also guided by our Feminist International Assistance Policy. And what I love about that is that in this policy, we now have an 80% target for all of our projects to integrate gender equality. So that's 80%, that's unheard of, and this is really, for us, a star where we're guided towards. Two other projects that I'll talk about that is part of the 5.3 billion is, as part of this, we also have 300 million set aside working with civil society, Indigenous people, and other organizations in Canada that help to support climate change in sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world. And as well, this is a really new one, so in addition to that 300 million, I should say, as part of that 300 million, we have a 20 million set aside that is focused on women's rights organization. And on top of the 300, we have an additional 15 million that is solely working with Indigenous peoples. So this is being developed right now and designed, co-designed actually with the 3 Indigenous people's organizations within Canada, and that's to work with Indigenous organizations in Canada and in the Global South. And finally, we're currently exploring a new partnership that aims to really empower women-led community-based organizations from Indigenous, rural, coastal, and vulnerable communities in the Global South. So this one is really dedicated to the Global South, and it's addressing all the issues that Delphina mentioned earlier. But we're still in the approval process, so I can't say more, but be tuned. It's coming. And so this is really just a summary of what gender just climate action looks like for me and more broadly for the Government of Canada. Thanks.
Thank you, Cam. I'll move on to Joanne. That was really very informative in terms of commitments and active programs where women could potentially also access for their capacity building and justice, social justice issues that Delphina also elaborated on. So, Joanne, over to you.
Thank you, Femi. Femi. For me, gender justice means providing adequate finance to meet the needs and aspirations of women as they define it, particularly women at the grassroots level and those that are marginalized. It also means them having a seat on the table in deciding how finances are going to be used. It also means that finance will have to abide by the respect and protection of the rights of women and their empowerment. But also when we talk of Indigenous women, it's also protecting the rights of Indigenous peoples as Indigenous women are part of Indigenous peoples, meaning the protection of our lands, territories, and resources. Finally, it also means that the allocation of finance should not be should follow a non-discriminatory approach and ensure that those that have the least will have the most access. Because the major problem now is also the access to finance, especially of women at the grassroots. Now, in relation to the presentation of Adolphine, I can empathize with it. I come from a region where mining is a big problem. And the good story as also related by Adolphine, it's the women, it's the Indigenous women who were at the front line. Because for Indigenous women, they lose a lot. They're the ones most connected to the land. So they feel they have more to lose. So they really sacrificed. So in the case of the women's struggle where I come from, with the operation of open pit mining, it was the women who laid down in front of bulldozers to stop the further destruction of their lands and resources. So the courage, no, meaning Indigenous women align their life with also the protection of the environment. So I think that's very clear in the story of Adolphine, and I hope we can stand by and provide solidarity to these women who are in the front line of defending nature for all of us.
Thank you, Joanne. Go ahead, you.
Thank you. So, Adaptation Fund is the first international climate fund dedicated to adaptation finance. And most of the Adaptation Fund supported projects and programs are community-based and locally led. To Adaptation Fund, gender just climate finance means in climate finance that we have to provide adequate finance for gender responsive adaptation measures, but also consider women and girls not just the beneficiaries, but the acts of change and promoting their leadership and also their participation in decision-making process as well. In addition, I think it's also very important to address the root cause and barriers for the to the gender equality. To the extent, like climate change, gender equality, and gender responsive climate finance requires comprehensive and concerted efforts from capacity building and awareness raising, climate finance, and knowledge management, etc. So to this end, like many other peers, Adaptation Fund has focused on the gender dimensions of climate finance and also strengthened gender responsiveness in providing adaptation finance, encouraging women's participation and leadership within our projects throughout the project life cycle. So the fund is committed to achieving gender equality throughout its operations, promoting access to women and girls to climate finance, as well as addressing the barriers of women and girls to the access. Therefore, the mainstreaming gender is the key to the fund's success, and this is explicitly codified in the fund's key instruments as well. The fund has also set the mandatory requirements for projects such as gender assessment and development of project-specific gender action plan, gender responsive and meaningful stakeholder consultations throughout the project life cycle, and gender responsive monitoring and evaluation. Just to share some good examples, the majority of our projects include specific targets for women as beneficiaries and also important stakeholders for consultation. And also, additionally, projects can also engage women's organization as executing partners or by including women as part of the project execution. Also, the local women's group actively engaged in actually leading in delivering trainings for the communities as well. Another positive practice is that we have seen that a gender focal point or gender specialist has been appointed within the project team to support the mainstreaming gender throughout the project activities as well. This confirms that our implementing entities are also committed to gender equality and recognizing the importance of this matter. One thing notable is that the fund's updated gender policy adopted intersectional approach, and as this presentation reminds us all, women are not homogeneous group. That means that we need to move beyond the binary approach, looking into the real lives of women and girls and other gender subgroups are living. And based on the deep understanding on those differentiated vulnerabilities and capacities of the women and other subgender groups, more tailored support needs to be provided so that the outcomes of the climate action can be more effective, sustainable, and also sustainable and more inclusive. So, in overall, the fund's gender policy aims two mandates. One is do no harm approach. Throughout our projects, Adaptation Fund supported projects should not increase any risks for women and other gender subgroups and other vulnerable groups, or should not reinforce any gender inequality. But also that's not sufficient. We encourage we encourage our implementing entities to take more proactive measures to remove the obstacles and barriers which hinder women's empowerment and hinder the contribution to climate action, so that the implementing entities should further promote the women's and girls' leadership and decision-making role within their communities, also increase their economic autonomy by securing an incomes and strengthen their skills and abilities to increase their adaptive capacity to climate change. So the fund's efforts for gender equality continues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Yung, and thank you, Mr. Pa, Cam, and Joanne. I think your responses, what I take from that is that the case of Adolfina is not removed from the intentions, and even in terms of the policy of the funds that are in place, that it is intended to also be accessible for these types of communities, for these types of cases, and that there are already some principles that are enshrined in the objectives of the funds or the intentions of the funds that resonate with protecting the rights of Indigenous women, and capacitating them and empowering them and promoting leadership and all that. So that's really good to hear. And I would now turn to our second speaker from the Alliance, Maria Maui, our friend from Tanzania, from Wated in Tanzania. Maybe hear from you on your experience and what you're doing with your organization, and also the networks that you're a part of.
Thank you. Thank you. I am grateful to be seated with all of you here. It's a privilege to me. It's a space which is not easily accessed by most women from where I'm coming from, and this is important for me to speak out. So I'm even being guided how I should be using this mic. No, I'm teasing. So my name is Maria Matui, and I had a small video. I don't know if it will be able to play.
Maybe you can do that at the end. Can we do it at the end?
Oh, yeah, it's fine.
Because the screen is frozen, we'll fix it, and well, you can go ahead with it.
Okay. So the video was to set a tone on what we'll be conversing, so that I bring in.
Maria, wait, just a sec.
It's okay. Please continue, Maria. Please continue.
Sorry, just continue.
Okay, thank you. So 5 minutes is all I have. So with these 5 minutes, I want to speak about the reason why the organization that I'm working with, which is Women Action Towards Economic Development, eventually decided to also engage in working with women in rural areas and those at peripherals to address the issues of climate injustices. And that we are not the only organization that either we are best situated to work on the climate issues, but we only got fortunate to have access to those who could support the work that we were able to do. So our story started when there was a very big project which was happening in one of the rural areas, and this was to allocate a land for agricultural purposes, and the large amount of communities were to be reallocated. So the advert which was roving around that area was informing the villagers, lease your land and go to the bank to get money. So for me, it's just that message which hit me and figured something was not okay. Land is all that they had, and land is everything that these communities depends on. But again, there is this call of money which no person can ever resist. So if my grandmother would have to give the land and get this, I don't know, amount of money to go and stay, maybe reallocate himself or herself to a place that she or he is not even familiar, something was not okay. So this calls us to look into how to mobilize those communities to start to understand basic issues on land rights, basic issues on investments, basic issues on fair, prior, and informed consent, and how they can be part of the processes. So two things that I want to speak about here is the civil societies and the government side of it. So with that now, we requested if we can start something small to understand how does this financing really work? Because it was a gray area, even for me, who has been working in between civil society and the government. So with this support from our partners in the GAGGA Alliance and other supporters, we went to 6 regions of the country engaging the rural women in those specific areas, working with grassroots organizations for them to tell us what do they understand by the financing, specifically either in investments or in agriculture. None of them had an idea. They never understood if there was even an area or an avenue they can speak or they can be engaged, because no information was trickling down. So with that now, we took it up and engaged the respective authorities, the Ministry of Local Government Authorities, because we are working with rural communities. But then we figured out with what we are trying to look into, the respective ministry was Vice President's office. So then later, after having a national dialogue, again, it was a gray area even to most policymakers, because it's not a conversation which happened in day-to-day life. And why this is important to bring it out in these conversations. Resources that we do believe are there, available, either is not directly channeled, or it's not really accessible, or it's not there. We don't know which one is which. And why that I'm bringing it in this platform and in this manner. If I am speaking with the Member of Parliament, who then is not informed of the policies within the country, something is not okay. But if I'm speaking with the Office of the Vice President's office and they know there is green climate financing, there is adaptation fund, and there is financing which has been channeled, but yet there's no information at the community level, something is not connecting. I have 1 minute. So what we decided to do with that one, we did a study. I have few flyers, and we shared the study again with the Office of the Vice President and the Office of the Prime Minister's office. And they were very responsive and they were very cooperative. That is something we are grateful for. And we try to see the gender linkage in all the documentation that we had in the country. Unfortunately and fortunately, we had gender strategy, but then we had several other policies and strategies which were gender silent. Nothing was about gender in those documents. And now more frustrating, there is no gender focal person. And now more interesting, there's the whole Ministry of Gender, which there is no coordination. So we have the issue of coordination, both at the sectoral level, but also within civil society. As you recall, I started saying that we are not the only organization working in the country, but we are several. So with what we started to do as the organization, we have six monitors working in 6 zones as regions in the country, and we almost have 120 grassroots and national organizations that are coming together to address the issue of gender, climate, and financing. And we collectively, in our own space with the small financing that we have, try to see what we can be able to address the challenges by having dialogues with the government, but also speaking within ourselves as civil society. But the challenge, again, is resources. They are not available. And if they're available, there is no transparent. And if there is transparent, there is no accountability. So I hope we'll have this conversation further.
Now the video is on. Okay. Thank you, Maria, for that, for sharing the practical, on-the-ground experience of how you've tested the waters. If gender-just climate financing is available, what would it go towards? And it's a combination of different activities and trying to attempt to achieve different kinds of objectives. Ultimately, it's for women empowerment, learning, dialogue with government, and also sustainable livelihood activities. I'll move now quickly to Cheryl Pulutan. She is the program coordinator at the Lilac Purple Action for Indigenous Women's Rights in the Philippines.
Good afternoon to the panelists and everyone in the room. This is my first COP, and on my 6th day here, what I already know has been reaffirmed, that as the climate crisis worsens, marginalized gender groups, especially women and girls in indigenous and local communities, will continue to be disproportionately impacted. And we have heard this from the story of Dolly and her community, a story that is also a shared experience of many indigenous women back in my homeland, the Philippines. It is heartbreaking when indigenous women whose daily activities are mostly related to climate adaptation and mitigation are also the ones who suffer the most when drought and unimaginably strong typhoons devastated their communities. I'm sorry. Just like what happened in the Tiduray Lambangian communities in my country, in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. We all agree that funds should be allocated to address this climate crisis, and what women are saying is to recognize us as key stakeholder in climate financing. Unfortunately, many climate funds still have a long way to go in integrating gender aspect into the project cycles and a genuine gender-responsive operations, as they have shared from fund allocation down to the project implementation in the country. My organization, and the Indigenous Women Partners are no experts in this very technical and technologically sophisticated concept of just transition. But what we are sure of is that the projects tied to this translates to opening green fields for mining to extract what they call essential minerals, a term we collectively reject. As we speak, communities in the southern part of the Philippines, specifically Tampakan, South Cotabato, are standing and fighting to block a mining company who is targeting to mine one of the largest copper resources in Asia, if not in the world. Women are in the front lines. The indigenous community now is divided. An indigenous woman was already killed. The list of indigenous women, environmental and human rights defenders being criminalized are increasing. And most of all, their livelihoods and culture are extremely threatened. Food insecurity is another adverse effect of these climate-funded projects. There are even studies in our country that in the ambition of the country to have these very big and very wide solar farms, it would result in weaker food sustainability because energy developments could snatch lands that could have otherwise been allocated for agricultural production. And we all know when there is food insecurity, there would be more burden for women in the families. Gender-just climate financing is not only about being able to access the fund, but should be holistic. One said, women should be given a space, should have a space in the table for decision making. This would mean that we should recognize critical roles of women in building the global solutions that we need to achieve a just, equal, and sustainable future. Women and all genders should have a representation and meaningful participation in the monitoring of these projects and in the decision making. And when in the course of the implementation of these funded climate projects, gender, women's rights, and in the course of the implementation of these projects, when gender, when women's rights, when indigenous people's rights are disregarded, a systematic and safe space for grievance and seeking accountability should be made available. Mike, I would end this with a question, and I hope the panelists could answer so that I could bring this to the communities back in my country. Where do indigenous women and girls go when projects supposedly funded to save the future of our planet are in fact destroying their present lives? Thank you.
will maybe allow our panelists now for one round of a response. I guess Che had opened up with a question, so feel free to also respond to that. But I think based on Che's and Maria's presentation overall, maybe you can respond on, thank you for giving the kind of the overview of each of the funds, and also Joanna's also presented some perspectives. But what actions are taken by member states and GCF or Adaptation Fund and other responsible agencies that will be tackling climate finance to ensure access, inclusion, and timely and appropriate redress for Indigenous and local women in climate finance, not to repeat practices that we've heard coming from Adolfina, coming from also the experience of Che and her group and the partners from the Philippines, and also the potentials that Maria had also described in terms of what they had tried to do. So maybe you can just have, we can have one round with all the our panelists to speak to either of these questions that Che had posed, and this last one from myself. Thank you. I'll start again with Mr. Pa.
Thank you very much for asking this question. The Green Climate Fund recognizes the importance of redress, and this is an important concern for women and indigenous people. There are various challenges that marginalized people may face, and when working with GCF projects and programs, there is a need to identify various ways of addressing these issues. It should also be noted that we have an independent redress mechanism, and although I cannot speak on their behalf, our colleagues would tell you that it takes a gender-responsive approach in relation to how it implements all its functions. The independent redress mechanism provides recourse to those adversely affected or who may be affected by the GCF projects or programs, and accepts requests for reconsideration of funding proposals that have been denied funding by the GCF board. Now, the GCF Indigenous Peoples Policy and updated gender policy also addresses the special needs of women and indigenous peoples and highlights the role that the IRM plays with respect to any violation of our policies. Now, the gender-responsive approach also recognizes the needs, priorities, power structures, status, and relationship between different gender groups and seeks to address those in the design, implementation, and evaluation of the GCF activities. Now, this approach seeks to ensure that everyone is given equal opportunities to participate in and benefit from redress mechanism mandates and proceedings, and promotes targeted measures to address those inequalities. Now, the fund encourages to continue to strengthen these mechanisms, including at both project and program design stages, and ensures that grievances, redress, and gender-responsive measures are also embedded in the project design and makes them accessible to both women and girls that might be directly impacted by our projects. Now, the Indigenous Peoples Policy and the GCF Environmental Social Policy also requires that all our funded activities establish an effective grievance redress mechanism at the project level. Now, these project level grievance redress mechanisms are required to be culturally appropriate, designed in consultation with the communities, and include considerations of customary law. Having project level grievance mechanisms do not preclude indigenous peoples and women from accessing the GCF independent redress mechanisms. In addition, the Secretariat's Indigenous Peoples focal point is also available to address or assist any community at any stage, and the accredited entities of the GCF are also required at their level to address some of the concerns. So with respect to the leadership roles, I think we have capacity building initiatives where through the Readiness Preparatory Support Program, where we can support women, raise awareness, and also provide them with support in terms of leadership roles, both at the community level and also at the level of their respective associations. Unfortunately, sometimes the funding proposals, particularly from Readiness, are focused mainly on government institutions rather than civil society organizations. But we think when projects are being designed, even at government level, there should be gender focal points at all government institutions, and it should filter down to the local level, local government levels, and also the civil society organizations. Now, within the coordinating mechanisms at the country level, the GCF focal points also need to ensure that they are open to all institutions, including civil society organizations and gender focal points within the civil society organization. This is something that we have been advocating, and we try to ensure that when projects come or even readiness proposals are designed, the coordinating mechanisms are embedded. But again, we have been hearing that there has always been resistance in inclusivity, and we would continue to advocate for diversification and ensuring that the civil society and gender, the perspective and the indigenous people perspective are also included. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pa. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It was funny, before we started, I was like, I hope all the hard questions go to the other panelists. So, but all kidding aside, I think to respond to this question, we need to reflect on what's happening in our own backyards, right? Because action has to start there. So I'm from Canada, and Canada is the land of Indigenous people. We have Inuits, First Nations, Métis, and these are the original habitats of Canada. And our last census actually said that almost 5% of the population was self-identified as Indigenous. So in 2015, our current government started a reconciliation with Indigenous people through a renewed nation-to-nation, government-to-government, and Inuit-Crown relationship. So, and this was based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership as the foundation for transformative change. So each of the departments were asked to take this into account in terms of their own programming. And Global Affairs Canada, we developed what we called an action plan for reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. So we recognize that walking on the path of reconciliation means enhancing our engagement with Indigenous peoples in Canada and globally. So this includes listening to, learning from, and working in partnership with those communities, and exactly what Maria was detailing in her intervention. And as Delphina, her story highlights that Indigenous communities have a truly deep connection with their land and resources. And actually just, I think a couple days ago, it's my first COP, so it's also a very blur to me, but just a couple days ago, I was listening to one of the Indigenous elders, that said his grandfather used to look at the clouds to determine weather patterns to go seal hunting. But it was hard to do now because of the climate change patterns and the changes. But this connection to the land is being lost, but they had that strong connection and still do. And so for us, for Canada, we're learning. Right? We're in the process and in this journey with our Indigenous peoples on a journey of learning. And as I mentioned, for us in the climate finance space, we're learning and we've integrated that, and that's why we set aside a $50 million fund to work specifically with Indigenous people so that we don't have to look at redress. We're already integrating that from the start in terms of our programming. We are listening. And just to note too that our programming, the 5.3 billion, 60% of that is actually loans. The 40% is grants. And the reason we use loans is because we believe that the private sector, we need to engage them, right? If we really want to mobilize the billions and trillions out there to address climate action. So in that way, we sit on almost all the boards of all the multilateral institutions and all the funds. And so I'm just going to give you one example where there was an ESG, an environmental and social guards concern that was raised in a run-of-the-river hydroelectric project that was being considered at one of the multilaterals. And when we heard this, we worked with a partner as well as other like-minded donors, and we used the seat of the multilateral bank to ensure that that project was pulled and that there was no funding to it. So really, just to wrap up, we do use our seat on those governance committees to ensure that projects are human rights-based and inclusive, and we will ensure that our broader programming includes voices from the start. And I actually just came out of another panel, and I think the wrap-up, it was food nutrition, food systems and nutrition, but the tagline I thought was amazing. It said, create spaces, places, and processes to achieve gender transformative change. And I think that's exactly what we're calling for here, right? To create those spaces, support those spaces, and the processes. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Cam. I'll jump first to Yung to maybe share what your perspective from the Adaptation Fund, and maybe the last, Joanne, more of the lessons that you've learned and experienced in terms of pushing for safeguards and redress and ways of better access for Indigenous peoples and Indigenous women in particular. So maybe Yung first.
Sure, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, that the Adaptation Fund updated its gender policy this year, and the intersectional approach is embedded there. So we have conducted gender training to help our implementing entities to better understand how to implement or comply with the fund's gender policy. And also we produced a gender guidance document for our implementing entities. So with that, that means that when our implementing entities conduct a gender assessment, when they design the funding proposal, intersectional approach needs to be there. That means that when they look at the women, when they take the gender assessment, women are not homogeneous group. They need to go further, look into ethnicity, age, and their social status, education, all those relevant socio-economic factors need to be considered, and based on those more deepened gender analysis, that the funding proposal will be much more tailored, and needed support and adaptation interventions can be more inclusive, and I think it's more effective. That's what we expect, that our funding, our implementing entities put forward more gender inclusive funding proposal, and also apply the intersectionality throughout the project implementation cycle. I would also encourage the local women's group, local Indigenous women's group, to try to tap into the opportunity to strengthen their capacity as well. For example, they could join or actively participate in the project sub-activities of the Adaptation Fund, Adaptation Fund projects and program. You could contact our implementing entities. Of course, it's up to the implementing entity to select the executing entity, but we do already have projects where local women's groups have been actively participating, not just as a beneficiary, but as an executing partner. So we'd like to see that practices or that model more ahead. Another opportunity I'd like to also remind is that although mostly the regular funding modality is that entity needs to get accredited, but the Adaptation Fund broadened the access. For example, the innovation grant, that is Adaptation Fund's Climate Innovation Accelerator, that is currently implemented by the UNDP and UNEP, and through that, and local women's group, local women's group, Indigenous women's groups, and those who might not be suitable for direct access modality or accreditation, they could tap into those grants, AFSIA we call, an Innovation Accelerator Program, Also, the funds enhance direct access, and that could also be an opportunity that you can directly participate and taking an important role in executing the adaptation projects. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanne, I'll go straight to you.
Okay, thank you, Femi. I want to share some experiences and lessons learned on the access, direct access to funds by indigenous peoples and indigenous women. If as per the study done by Rainforest Norway, with the billions of funds that went to to combat climate change, less than 1% went to indigenous peoples, in spite of the fact that we protect 80% of biodiversity in the world, and we are 6% of the global population, with majority very marginalized. Also, in the recent pledge of 1.7 billion, the Forest Pledge, which includes an objective of direct access by indigenous peoples to that $1.7 billion, only 7% went direct to indigenous peoples, as per the report of the donors themselves. So that means while there is funding allocated to indigenous peoples, the direct access is a big problem. The money is not trickling down. And we need to address this. And my experience with working with women is that women don't know about log frame, objectives, outputs, outcomes, all of these kind of requirements to be able to present a proposal, right? But they know, and evidence have shown, that women are the best implementors and managers of projects, especially projects that are addressing their needs and priorities. So meaning if we give funds to women, we can trust that they will use it wisely and they will use it collectively, because there's an innate, for indigenous women, there is already like a built-in cooperation because we depend on each other. So when we also deal with our needs collectively, we also manage the resources collectively. And that is a very big asset. That is an asset that we should build on to provide direct access to indigenous women. And this will make a difference. This will enhance further the contribution and roles of women on not only the protection of biodiversity, but the sustainable use of resources, food security, and strengthening social cohesion on the ground. So that means there needs to be flexibility from donors on how women can access funds, because that is critical, that we need to make funds culturally appropriate and culturally sensitive. Otherwise, we will again be discriminating on women who are already discriminated because they have least access to education and they have diverse languages. Many cannot even speak the national language. So how can they even prepare proposals in that sense? So that's one. Now finally, I was reminded of the time just to mention on the safeguards. I do believe that we are again threatened by so-called solutions, renewable energy with mining, with dams, and also conservation when we are again evicted from our lands is a major threat for us in the name of climate change. So we need strong safeguards, and that is the recognition and protection of our rights as indigenous peoples, the requirement for free, prior, and informed consent for all these projects, our participation in decision-making, and establishment of effective grievance mechanism and strong accountability of business and states, that when they violate our rights, they cannot get away with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne, well, we are coming close to the time, and I'm being reminded I only have 3 minutes, so unfortunately, I'm not able. We wanted to also get questions from the floor. We're not able to do that, and also last words from our other speakers. So I thank you. Thank you for all our panelists and our speakers. So Mr. Pa, Cam, Joanne, Yung, Maria, Dolly, Sarah, and Che. Thank you so much for sharing what you're doing now, how you're also helping your own organizations, your country, to make gender just finance, climate finance a reality, and also to come here today to also be listened to by the likes of Dolly, Sarah, Che, and Maria. So hopefully there is an opportunity that we can tap and forge together in partnership. As GAGGA, indeed, we enjoin all developed country parties to publicly commit, like Cam has done, hopefully on behalf of Canada, to their fair share of climate finance and making significant and appropriate allocations going towards the advancement of gender equality, and to support the initiatives and plans of grassroots women's organizations to build their resilience, their climate resilience, and to secure and protect them and their communities, territories, and natural resources from destruction, free from harm and suffering. To stop all public funds, subsidies, and insurances to oil, gas, and coal projects, including destructive, extractive, essential mineral projects that don't adhere to environmental and social safeguards. There will be no just transition if this persists. To monitor and evaluate results and build critical information and monitoring loops to ensure that appropriate, timely, and effective redress mechanisms and response are upheld and are effectively functioning. For the GCF and the Adaptation Fund, we enjoin you to continue to promote the full and effective representation of Indigenous and local women in your structures of decision-making on replenishment, planning, and allocation of climate funds. Funds to allocate directly for the capacity strengthening of women's organizations, and fund to implement and realize gender-just climate policies and commitments. There are a number of strong, well-organized, local, national, regional women's organizations and programs to learn from, and we heard some of them today, and women who can attest that these are in place. To learn from them, to continue to dialogue and exchange and innovate where climate finance can also be directed. Finally, just a promotion. The Women and Gender constituency invites everyone to the annual Gender Just Climate Solutions Awards ceremony happening on November 14th, and the following day a session to showcase different examples of gender just climate solutions. This is part of an ongoing WGC Gender Just Climate Solutions program, where women leadership and good examples are celebrated and recognized, along with a mentorship opportunity between old and new awardees, and opportunities to scale up and replicate gender-just climate solutions. So see you all there. And once again, thank you for your presence and contribution here. You may also stay for the next session, Feminists Speak Out. Good afternoon, and keep safe, and enjoy the rest of the day and tomorrow, and more energy for next week. And again, I give you our QR code if you want to hear and learn more about the call to action. And also, Che had given a flavor of also the call to action of the Women in Action on mining in Asia. So there is a QR code, I think. Yeah. So can you... Yeah. And then, finally, can we have a family photo, group photo? I don't know, here? Maybe, I think it's also good if the audience
Hello, everyone. Can we have a round of applause for our fantastic host, Femi?
So we will have 2 photos with everyone, with our panelists. So please, don't be shy. Please come forward. Let's all have one. And I will.
Hello.
Please come forward. Please come forward because the next session, they're getting ready. And I hope our panelists can stay in your seats.